Okay, hi everyone. So welcome back to another Hack and Tell. This time we have an interesting and a special episode where we have someone that's from the sort of quasi-core Arweave team. Here today to speak to us. This is Cedrik, who's been founding the Community.XYZ protocol as well as platform. Cedrik, welcome.
Hey Sam, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So the journey with you in the Arweave ecosystem is slightly different than the other founders. It's kind of an interesting one. Do you want to tell us how you got started with Arweave and how things progressed?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in crypto since 2016, pretty much full time. And then at some point in 2019, Arweave released a hackathon to build little projects on top of Arweave and to learn about the technology. So I created a little project on it. Then I really loved it because it was so easy compared to other crypto technologies. So for example, I come from the Web 2.0 and I know pretty much all the languages to create a web project. So it was so easy to go from there to Arweave that I really loved it. So I kept building little stuff and I started talking with you. And then, I joined, I think it was about 2 months later, I was able to join the core team.
It was a really interesting journey to see. I mean, you started off, what was the first project that you built in the ecosystem?
It was Arweave apps.
Arweave apps, wow. Yeah, I remember the conversations surrounding that. It's kind of interesting in some ways. It mirrors the conversations we ended up having that led to the creation of Community.XYZ, just at a sort of larger scale, right? Like the ecosystem was getting to this point where we had, I think, 5 or 6 different applications, but nowhere to find those applications. And then, of course, there was this need to have an index. And that was when you got building Arweave apps.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, when I first joined Arweave, the hardest thing I found was to find the other apps that existed previously. Right. So on Discord, we kept asking between each other, which app do you know, and which ones do I know, to share between all of us.
Right.
So I said, okay, that's probably a good idea to have an index, a place where we can find all of those apps that are being created right now, but they don't have a home to find them. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we were faced with a sort of similar problem, I guess, a year later, but in the profit sharing community space. So sort of PermaWeb applications that have a DAO attached where you can share the proceeds of the running of the application. And I think when we got started talking about this, it was really a case of like where people are going to go to govern their applications, right? And then from there, it's kind of grown. Well, perhaps you want to describe Community.XYZ a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So Community.XYZ, it's similar to a DAO, let's say, for the platform. So it's a governance platform where you can go and interact with your community, which is a set of people that owns the tokens that they create at the same time they create a community. So it uses the profit sharing tokens that are on top of Arweave, but with extra features that allow people, for example, to transfer tokens, but also to mint new tokens, to burn tokens, and also we have a vault that allows people to have governance power on the communities they are part of. And after that, we created opportunities, which is another interesting part of the communities, which is similar to a job board, where people can go and do little tasks in exchange of tokens of that community.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting avenue for people building out their profit-sharing communities, essentially to distribute ownership in proportion to the work that people are doing to help build it. And it's been very exciting to see how people have picked that up. I think it must be the second largest job board now in crypto, I suppose, after Gitcoin, I would assume.
Yeah, I think Gitcoin is the most popular one right now that we
Yeah.
know of. And yeah, after that, they have been other little projects that existed, but they didn't work so well. So yeah, they aren't active right now. And yeah, the opportunities page, we have, since we launched, we have over 50 opportunities that have been created already. And we
Wow.
have 25 of them that are still active and waiting for applicants. But yeah,
Wow,
that
that's
means that,
amazing.
yeah, that around a little bit more than 25 have been already closed. So that's really good.
Wow. That is really good, actually. Like I had expected that the platform would take longer to generate adoption on the I guess on the supply side of jobs was my expectation, because you have this like bootstrapping problem. So you have two sides of the market. You've got
Yeah.
to have people that are willing to offer their labor in exchange for profit sharing tokens, and also people that are putting up jobs. And obviously they're not going to put up jobs if there's no one there to do the labor.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to see how quickly that has been adopted. And I'm kind of curious to know, are you keeping track of the fees that are generated by those? Because those are generating fees in the profit sharing tokens of the projects that are offering the jobs, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we have two fees that we earn as a community, well, as being part of Community XYZ. The first one is by doing different actions. So, for example, if someone's create a community, or if we have votes, or all of that. So that we have been keeping track of. And the other part is when you create an opportunity, we charge a little fee on the value, well, on the tokens that the community is being creating the opportunity. And yeah, for that one, we don't have, I don't have an exact amount for now, but yeah, that's good.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really exciting way for people to get sort of exposure to the wider ecosystem as well. Because if you have these projects that are popping up and mostly getting sort of tasks done by opportunities on the opportunity board, then as a holder of Community XYZ, they're typically doing these things at like a almost pre-team phase. So when it's really just the founder. So actually the valuations are quite low. So the number of tokens that are going out for people to do little tasks on top of it is relatively high, at least relative to the, what would you say, like the terminal value of the project. So that I think is really interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Amazing. So over time, you've kind of gone from this system that was purely about governance of the communities, and then you added this component that was, you could call it like a work hub, I suppose. What's next for Communities XYZ?
Well, we want to keep building it, keep growing it. We are working with Arweave contracts. So there's still a lot to be done there, I believe. And we want to also allow people, for example, that when they create a community, they don't necessarily have to use our contract. So they can alter the contract and create their own versions. And and on our personal contract, we want to have little functions, let's say plugins or things like that, that people could inject into the contract itself, so they don't need to keep upgrading every single time when we want to release something new, which can get kind of annoying at some time. We've seen that already on Ethereum, for example. So we want to minimize that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. We're going to have someone talking to us next week about this kind of injectable upgrades project. And that's very exciting. They're already using that sort of pattern to add NFTs to profit sharing communities. So the idea is that each profit sharing community can sort of mint an NFT, and then people can buy those NFTs in the PST of the community, and then trade them. And you could think like this can be used for basic stuff like, wouldn't it be nice if we all had avatars, for example? That would be great. And you can mint avatars that relative to some, you can do it algorithmically, or you can upload them, or whatever it happens to be. But another part of it that's really interesting is you could use them for things like, going back to Arweave apps, you can use them for like featured positions on the board. So you could have featured position number 1 is like some banner ad or something like that, and then you have like 2 below or whatever it happens to be And you just have NFTs associated with these. And then you can just read that out of the contract state at the time that the person renders the website. And there you go. You essentially got like an ad network where there's a market for bidding on those positions, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I think that that will open many, many doors to different projects. Yeah. And in a way, we have a contract, a main contract for the communities, but each community is a little bit different, and they handle things differently also. So as you mentioned, for example, for Arweave apps, having something for featured apps doesn't mean that another project wants something like that. So instead of creating an entire contract again, they just need to inject that little piece of code, and then there you go.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of things we can do with that. I mean, really the idea behind profit sharing communities in the first place was to build something that was so extensible that you could use it to govern any kind of application. And I think this like extensions framework that they're talking about is a big step up in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And also for community, at least, we want to keep it as open as possible. And I think this allows many, many opportunities to be built also for different projects. And we could inject, for example, a little piece of code from one project that my project used the same thing. So instead of rebuilding it again from scratch, we go to GitHub or any other platform for coding, and then we grab that little piece of code and we inject it, and that's it.
You almost have like a package manager for extensions for communities, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's really interesting stuff that has to be worked out there about like preference order. So how do I like insert a community or insert a community extension? And then where do I choose like the execution order for that? Because basically what's going to happen is that like there's just a function that needs to be called every time you call the contract, so that the extension can just like update its state or whatever it has to do essentially. But how you order these, because they might interact with each other, is quite an interesting question. I'm not sure it's completely solved yet, so that'll be interesting to like.
For now we are thinking of priorities, and I'm pretty sure the NFT part that we will be hearing from next week, they have integrated the same thing, because in fact it's one of the people that are building the NFT part that we will hear from next week. If I'm correct, it's the same person.
Yes, they are. As the NFT person. That's right.
So he sent me the first part of the code just to know how it works, and from there we are moving it to have an integration for the SmartWeave contract for communities. Amazing.
Interesting. Okay, so I guess one of the questions is, what are the latest things you've been working on with Community.XYZ? And I've seen this Verto button, so maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that. And then also what's coming in the near future.
Yeah, for sure. So we have integration with Verto. So now you can right away, from creating a community up until you buy tokens or you sell your tokens directly from Community.XYZ. So you don't need to go to another platform or to learn how to use another platform. Directly from community, you are able to do the entire process of your community.
Yeah, and I think the really fascinating part here is, I mean, that's amazing for a startup that you can do that in a single platform now. But the part that strikes me as kind of, what would you say, indicative of where the ecosystem might go in the future is that you've essentially taken a piece of infrastructure from another web service and then embedded it in your own. And not only are you essentially making use of composable elements to build your web service, which is kind of cool. On top of this, you're also distributing tips to Verto profit sharing token holders when you make use of their service. And that's amazing because, that means that they're still incentivized to increase the, what would you say, the effectiveness or the quality of the service that they're offering. And similarly, I think people are now, sorry, go on.
Yeah, for sure. No, I wanted to say that I think that's one of the other great features that Arweave has, that creating these communities, these projects, you are able to inject them with just a little piece of code. It's really one line of code, and you inject it, and you are now interacting with that project, and they earn a fee, so they are still engaged to keep building it and to keep growing the project, and at the same time you are giving extra features to your users of your platform. So yeah, we did the same thing with Community. We have Community.XYZ, which is just a little piece of code. And yeah, all of the projects are able to interact with their communities without even having to go to Community.XYZ.
Exactly. I mean, that's the really exciting part here, is almost stacks of these extensions are being created where everyone is being appropriately remunerated for their component of that stack. And for maintaining it and making it better. I think that's a very... It's a good mechanism design relative to the typical open source software kind of world in Web 2, where basically you get all these people like building these services and then fewer people maintaining them. And relative to the overall users of those applications, it's almost zero. You know, it's like 99.9% of people are consumers of the things that people build. And then it's like another 99% of people are builders relative to maintainers, because no one likes to maintain code. And just fundamentally, you don't have the incentives to do it. Whereas in this system, what seems to be emerging is like, okay, I'm going to put my library at this location. You can pull it in whenever you want. And you can just make use of it and do like a one-line call that allows you to buy or sell a PST, for example, or start a vote or cast a vote in a community. And and then the people that generated or created that library will be appropriately remunerated along the way.
Yeah, exactly. So at a point also you are incentivized to keep being being participant of that project. For example, if you own part of that token by doing opportunities, then you are incentivized to keep helping grow that project itself, because at the end you earn also from the tips of that project. So
and we're even seeing people experiment with that mechanism design and saying, like, I think Weave ID is looking at this, and basically they have like a referrer element. So when you say open a Weave ID, I'm not sure what we call, like, it's not quite a pop-up, it's like a pop-over, I suppose. Open up the login element. If people import their wallet and there's a wallet creation fee, if they do that, so they onboard with Weave ID, then the profit-sharing token holders of the calling application receive some portion of the tip generated from that. So now you have people incentivized to integrate these libraries, as well as to onboard people to these other services. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, in fact, it's the same thing with Verto or Community.XYZ. If you want to integrate it, for example, on Verto, we don't charge an extra fee or anything like that for now. But yeah, we could if we want to. So at the same time, we earn a little piece of the fee, but Verto keeps earning part of the fee also. Yeah,
there's an interesting question there to kind of experiment with, which is like, should we be giving away PSTs in the callee application? So in this case, for example, Weave ID. Should we be giving away little bits of ownership in Weave ID? Or should we be giving away some of the R that Weave ID is generating from having someone import a wallet? Because if you give away Weave ID, then they're still getting access to tips downstream, right?
Yeah.
But also they have a now potentially vested incentive to, in the success of Weave ID itself. Feels like you can play around with that, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, amazing. So there's the Verto integration. What's coming up?
And next, what we are working currently is to have a caching system to help make the website faster. In general, everything works quite fast, but over time, with all the interaction and all of that, since we are using a smart Weave contract, it needs to read the states of each interaction it happens.
Right, exactly.
So with time, it's going to be very noticeable. So right now we started working on the caching system, and we can see already a few parts of the website that are starting to get a little slower. So it's something that we really need.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to Arto about this after the community call yesterday, and we were describing, or he he put words to the idea that we'd been working on. You know that the process, sometimes you can kind of have an idea and you put it into the world a little bit, but then someone else comes along and says, oh yeah, what you're doing is this. Like, he was one of those. And he was saying that essentially what SmartWeave is the start of like a modular smart contracting system. So what SmartWeave does at like the base layer is really just come to consensus about the inputs to a smart contract. That's it. Or rather, inputs to a program is maybe even a fairer way of putting it. And that meant that like the base layer language of this was obviously JavaScript. But now you can write, the idea was that sort of JavaScript would be the assembly language, and then you'd have stuff that compiles to it. So now you can write in JavaScript, also TypeScript, and now Clarity, of course, and then very soon Solidity, and also Viper. And like very soon you have this ecosystem of languages built on top of this thing. And then there's this other question that comes about, which is like, okay, can we make a sort of layer 2 scaling system, which is really just a caching system that tells us what the state of the contract was at some certain point in time, so that we don't have to replay the entire state. And I think there'll be lots of solutions to this, just like there are lots of different languages that you can program on SmartWeave with. So it's unhelpful bells. Sorry. So it's interesting to see what those different solutions will be. One of them, I think, is kind of the route that you're going down, where you're essentially setting up what we might call like a community compute node, right? So one node in the ecosystem that's elected by the DAO to run a backend server, basically. And then they presumably stake some tokens, and you can slash those tokens if they start acting incorrectly. And then presumably you also distribute a tip to them, something like that. Is that the route you're going down?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the route we are going down right now. But as you mentioned, I'm pretty sure that we will see many different routes for this. It's not an issue, but for this approach, there are so many different ways of doing it. And even when we talked a little bit about it, I think it was last week, we found many different routes that we could go. And for now, this is the one, but I'm pretty sure we will be testing different ones and seeing different ones coming on top of Arweave, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think so. It's one of those interesting kind of like quirks of the architecture. You get this benefit that you can run large amounts of compute on the back end, but it also comes with this price that like that compute has to be done on the client side. And that means that like, well, how do you essentially truncate the amount of work? So there's this community compute node idea. And I think as long as the economic cost of the slashing that might take place is sufficiently high, then that basically works. But that's the question, right? How do you make it so that the potential take from an attack is lower than the stake? I think there are quite a few people. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, because when we are caching states, for example, we need to make sure that the state we are reading is really correct. It cannot be changed, because if it's different, then they could have malicious people trying to do things that we don't want to. So it's very important to have it right. Even the basic concept of it needs to be right.
Yeah, I totally agree. Arto was actually talking about potentially building a project to do a sort of generalized version of this. So something like a mechanism where every 1,000 blocks, every contract that is registered with the system to be checkpointed or snapshotted, I guess, you would write the state into the chain. Someone would be elected from the group to write the state into the chain. And then all of the other members of the DAO would check that state. They would make sure that it was the same. And if they saw that it wasn't the same, they would start a vote to slash the stake of the person that committed it, while also, making a vote that basically says, hey, we don't actually think this is the state. And that would be quite simple and also quite effective, I think. So there's lots of interesting stuff to do in that area.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, awesome. So caching server to make sure things are very fast. And this, I guess, butts up onto another set of questions about like Web 2, Web 3 speed comparisons. I mean, one thing I've noticed is that like a lot of profit sharing communities now are of such high quality that you wouldn't necessarily guess that they were a like decentralized web project, which is almost a problem in itself, because like people come along and they're like, well, I don't understand why this is special. And then we have to make it clearer to them that something interesting is happening underneath. Whereas like, I don't know, Aragon, frankly, it's so damn slow. You know that there's something peculiar happening, and then you like want to dig into the details and you learn how the thing is governed. That's an interesting.
For example, I've been playing around with Aragon in the past, and I was really hoping to see what will happen if we have many votes on a community, since it's built and it really needs to read all the states before getting to get all the votes.
Is that what Aragon is doing?
I'm not sure what they are doing, but it's quite slow. So I was wondering what will happen to us, because we are reading the states, and then when we get to the latest states, then we read all the votes that are happening, and then we show it on the page. And it's not extremely fast. It's not. It doesn't take a second to appear, but it's quite fast. So as you mentioned, it's really surprising, and sometimes you even suspect like what's going on. Is it really decentralized?
Right.
So for people that don't know that much about it, and they come on the page and they see the page loads right away, for example, the home page, which is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it loads really right away. So they wonder, how does it work? Is it really many peers, many nodes that are talking to each other, or what's happening there? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think a large part of the speed there really comes down to the GraphQL querying engine. Like, certainly if we tried to build this with RQL, we all know it would take like 10 million years.
Oh my God, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'm glad those days are over. And I think, GraphQL definitely sets us up for like high performance applications in a much better way. It wasn't really possible before. Yeah. Okay, so that's super cool. Do you know approximately like when that'll ship, or?
For the caching? That's a good question. I'm hoping to have it quite soon, but I don't yet have a specific date for it.
Cool. So what else apart from that? Like, where is this going in the future? Where do you want this to be in like 6 months or so?
Other than that, we have little bugs that I need to solve. We want to make it even better than what it's right now. And also we want to release something called Pouch, which will be a profile system on top of the communities. So you will be able to see your profile or others' profiles. And at the same time, we are able to see, for example, the Arweave balance, so the AR balance they have, but not just that, also all the communities they are part of, and see the balances they own on those communities. So it's an entire profile system on top of the communities, profit sharing tokens, and Arweave.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
So almost like a social wallet, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in a way, it's a profile of your wallets handling every tokens that you own. Because right now we don't have that, so it's really complicated to see how much of each token I own personally.
Right.
So sometimes you might lose track after many communities of where do I have some tokens, where do I don't have, how many I want of those tokens, all of that. Right now, you need to go to each community and read each data and see how many you own. So
Right, for sure. Yeah, that's fascinating, particularly if you have these mechanisms where you're getting tips in the form of other PSTs.
Yeah.
Then that becomes very hard to track because you never knew which PSTs you're exposed to in the first place. So it's essentially like a guessing game at the moment, I think. So that sounds like a big step up. And am I right in understanding that like whenever I see another holder on another, I guess, profit sharing community, I can click then on their address and see their pouch and see like what they're engaged in?
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea. To be able to,
That's awesome.
At the same time, also, if you are, let's say, following someone, sometimes I hear that on the crypto space where you follow people that are of your interest and they
Wow.
have been doing really well, for example, on
Yeah.
exchanges and things like that, then you will be able to kind of follow them at the same time to see how many of those tokens they own, how many of those others, and all of that. Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's really cool. I wonder if we could almost... Yeah, so there certainly seems to be an effect in the crypto space where there are kind of trend setters, and then other people join other people in projects based on those trends, right?
Yeah, it becomes in a bit a little bit similar to gamification, where you want also to have some of those tokens because that person that you follow also has those tokens, and similar things like that could happen.
Right.
Thanks to the pouch. Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. And will the pouch stuff be available as an API or like a library?
Yeah, exactly. The pouch, we will have a front page on community, but the pouch, the code that we want to first release is a library. So anyone are able to set their pouch. And for example, even let's say another project like Arweave, if they want to show only the tokens that that person owns from them, they could just grab that little piece of code and have that directly in there. So yeah, it's also opens a few opportunities for other projects to handle the pouch.
Yeah, that's really powerful. That's very exciting. I wonder. So one thing I've been thinking about and talking to Zach about quite a lot is this idea of monetizing revenue streams inside applications, or the fact that basically every revenue stream inside an app can now be monetized actually extremely simply just by making it into a profit sharing token. And then having like calls to Verto.js to buy and sell bits of it. And part of me wonders how that'll interact with Pouch, because of course, like you've got this, it makes sense for big profit sharing communities. Like I own some percentage of Verto, right? So we can get the details about Verto from the chain and it shows up in a nice way with a logo. Although actually I think that Tate ran out of money, or ran out of R at least, to pay for the vote to change the logo. But in principle, you should be able to see like all of the logos, all of the description text, that kind of stuff easily from the contract. But then with a pure PST, it's almost slightly unrelated, right, to the underlying asset, or at least it's more separated. So have you got any thoughts on like how we would make it so that you can easily get access to metadata of kind of all types, ideally, for PSTs that people hold in their pouches?
Yeah, for sure, because it's a little bit different. For example, a community has a name, has a logo, has a description, all of that.
Yeah.
But profit sharing token doesn't have that to begin with. So maybe it could be a layer on top of it where we handle those datas or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We should sync up on that. Because I think Bandplay and ArcLight are going to be the first projects to do that quite soon, I would expect. I just spoke to Bandplay yesterday, and they've kind of set up this system whereby you can mint a new PST every time you upload an album, and then every time someone downloads the album or makes a local copy of it, then they tip the PST holders. And so now you have this sort of, what would you say, like revenue stream PST rather than application PST.
Yeah, that's another great approach, I think, for profit sharing tokens that, we've seen it with the music apps that have been released. And I think many other projects, similar to, for example, NFTs. We could have NFTs that the person, when they mint the NFT at the beginning, they also create a profit sharing token. And then everyone who owns that NFT, when there's a transfer or something similar to that, the other holders of that NFT could earn something maybe. It opens many possibilities.
Yeah, you feel like the amount of DeFi-like things that you can build on top of the profit-sharing token model is like pretty extreme, because you can do meta profit-sharing tokens in some sense, right? So, for example, with Weave ID, right, when you pass the profit sharing community contract that you want to be paid for having integrated Weave ID in the first place through this referral system, then it can just like resolve. So it's a different application. Now it's resolving the owners of this other application and then distributing tokens for itself to that group of people. And that's really interesting. Like you can see that can be pretty arbitrarily combined and what would you say? Arbitrarily combined and experimented with. Like there's very obvious avenues there. Okay, amazing. So that's kind of like near term, I guess. Cool. Have you got any thoughts of like what you want to build longer term with this, or is it really just about getting people on board with the system and using it more after you reach this point where you almost have this, I guess, social hub for profit sharing token holders and community votes and the like?
Yeah, we have a really, really amazing community of developers that are starting to build on top of community. And most of them came from Arweave and from the profit sharing tokens because they participated on the profit sharing tokens program. And now they have pretty much all of them built a community. And the feedback has been so good and so amazing. I really, really love what we have right now, that we kind of work between each other. Like, I get feedback from them and then I start building other things on top of it. So having something like really, really long term, I don't have it right now. I prefer what we have been doing, like thinking for the next few months what we want to build. And and also what I would like to have is I'm starting to find some people and things like that to build a team around also community, so we are able to keep growing faster that we have been doing so far, which has been great and amazing. But to keep this piece, we need more developers. So and from there I also think one thing I like to do is talk with the other team members and come up with ideas all together to increase the value or the what community becomes.
Right. Yeah, I think the lean approach is the right one. I mean, this is kind of like the key learning from Web 2 startups, actually, the whole way along, was that really until you have like very large amounts of traction, you should just experiment with a whole bunch of different stuff and then see what people like and then throw more resources and time into that. So I think in the crypto space, there's kind of this, what would you even call it? Maybe idealization of long-term roadmaps and this type of like highly forward-thinking, planning essentially. But in reality, you find that most of these projects don't really stick to their roadmaps, and even if they do, it's sort of dangerous because you're basically sticking yourself to a plan that you have very little understanding whether it'll actually work in the real world. Whereas what we've learned from startups in practice is you should do the opposite. You should stay as agile as possible until you find your niche, and then you should just quickly try and dominate the niche.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So another thing that we would like to have is we would like to hire someone also for word of mouth, just to try to grab more people, for example, from the Ethereum ecosystem and other places too. Because it's so easy to integrate community, and also you don't need to rebuild your project to integrate it. You can just, for example, put it on top of what you already have and build your community on top of that. So
I mean that reminds me of the work Tate and the Verto gang have been doing with giving what would you say, essentially tips in Ethereum for profit sharing token holders on Arweave. And so they've got this, I think they call it like ETH Link now, or Weave Link, either one of these, where the basic idea is you like log in with your wallet, and then you make a kind of assertion on chain. My Ethereum wallet is this, and then anyone can look it up, and then anyone can credit you if there happens to be a reward from a profit sharing community that's denominated in ETH. Now you can just send, or any ERC20 for that matter. Now you can just send it directly to their address. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so it's amazing. I definitely think like bringing other people on board to help you. I mean, it's funny because you've been sort of contracting a developer advocate with us, with like very core to the team for a year and a half now, and then recently you've been sort of like more and more just becoming the founder of Community.XYZ. Now I think like you get some help with the Community.XYZ stuff like full time. That'll be amazing because then we can like. Well, I actually think that it's a pretty good vantage point you have to be the founder of Community.XYZ, because you know all of the founders in the ecosystem from developer advocacy work. So it's this weird like crossover role.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know them and they know me, so they trust
Right.
me also because, yeah, as I mentioned, for the feedback has been really, really amazing, and
Yeah.
even I keep talking with Tate, for example, from Berto, and with Phil from Arweave, and we
Yeah.
keep giving us ideas, and yeah, pretty much everyone else who's has created a community, they ask me questions or I ask them questions, so that's really, really nice, and.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important for Community XYZ because at the end, that's what community is, a community. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, in some weird way, maybe we should have called it ecosystem XYZ, because it's like the meta community is in Community XYZ, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very exciting to see the patterns in the ecosystem developing right now, where just founders of one project are realizing that their thing heavily integrates nicely with another thing. And so sort of you get this, it's not a very nice word, but congealing effect where everything is becoming sort of intertwined and working with everything else. And then you get these very rapid feedback loops between the founders of all the projects. It's really exciting to see. It feels like the scaled up version of what we had going on in the community right back when you joined us, actually. So back then it was just like tiny projects, and now these are like real startups, but they're intermingling, would you say, in exactly the same kind of pattern that we saw then, just on a much larger scale.
Yeah, that's true. Because I remember when I created Arweave apps, then someone else created Arweave ID for the profiles, and not even a week after I had integrated Arweave ID, and then it was like, oh my God, we can integrate those things and interact between each other and all of that. Yeah, and now it's happening, but as you say, in a much larger scale. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think that Arweave ID is probably the first, the first serious, what would you say, like prototype of the open web ecosystem in the wild. Like someone came up with this little application that basically and I'm afraid I forget the original founder. It wasn't you, right? But you just kind of like took it on.
Yeah, it wasn't me at the beginning. I just integrated into Arweave apps, and I added the little avatars on top, auto-generated avatars on top of it, because it didn't have that at the beginning. But yeah, I didn't create it. And yeah, what's interesting also from Arweave ID is that they didn't release a library or anything like that you could just go ahead and integrate it into your app.
Yeah.
But thanks to Arweave, how it works, since it's a huge blockchain, so a huge database, you just go and at that time, and it's still using that, which isn't that good, but it uses a RQL where you just go and grab the data. You don't even need to have a JavaScript library or from any other language. You just go with the API and interact with it, and we were able to grab the data from Arweave ID.
Yeah, exactly. That was really interesting. So the story is basically this founder who, unfortunately, his name has been kind of lost to history at this point, but I guess it's all on chain somewhere, right?
Yeah.
They came along, they built this like front end application where you could drop your key file and you could just say, my name on Twitter is this, and my Discord handle is that, and my email address is this, or whatever it happens to be. You press a button and it sends a transaction to the Weave in this open format, but everything on the Weave is open, right? This open format that says, okay, if you want to know the email address of the person that is using this wallet, so the hash of this public key, then it's this. And you can obviously just easily query for those. It was using RQL then, but it can easily use GraphQL. And then we had this sort of natural pickup. I don't know if the original founder even stayed around in the ecosystem. I think they might just have left after that. But you came along and you're like, wow, this is a really cool thing. We should put it in Arweave apps. Because it's just a very basic, nice thing to have a username, right? And then once it was in Arweave apps, I think other people saw it and they were like, basically every social application in the ecosystem just integrated this standard. And that was really, really interesting to see. And it's very powerful that people can just pick up other people's work and permissionlessly modify it, improve it. So you added avatars essentially, and then just put it out into the world again, and other people can then take it, and they don't even have to talk to the founder or even, in this case, know who they were. It's
in
like
fact, the latest integration with Avatar that was done from Arca, in fact, if I'm correct.
Interesting.
And
I think that was Ross.
Oh yeah, I think it was Russ. Yeah.
Right. So someone picked it up again and then just like decided, well, what it needs is this, and then they just do it and permissionlessly put it out into the world. And then someone else can, build on in the future. Yeah,
exactly. And you see, that's something that was created about a year ago, and people forgot a little bit about it. And then when I released the version on Community that had the avatar, I got so many DMs from people. How you do that? How do you do that? I want to do it also on my project. And I was like, oh, it's so simple. Just go to Arweave ID and there you go. So something that was almost lost. Russ took it and he updated it a little bit. And then here you go. Now it's used by many. Yeah.
And this is a pattern that's really only possible on like the open web, on the PermaWeb. I think like that founder is gone. So imagine this in the Web 2 world. It would be like I came along and I'm going to run some kind of server which associates some ID of some kind with other links on the web or on the internet. So like SMTP or whatever protocol. Like this is me on this service, basically is what we're saying. Yeah. And then the founder would have forgotten about it. The server would have been switched off.
Yeah.
And that's it.
The database will be lost.
The database is lost, Whereas this, no one has any fear about that. It's just completely impossible. We have this kind of like mutual understanding in the ecosystem now that if you want to refer to people's names, you do it like this. And we just know that will always continue working. No one ever has to worry that it's going to be turned off or changed or anything like that. It just is the standard. Which is it's really exciting. We kind of theorized about this about a year ago, and now we see like this first use case. It's a very basic one, but I think like over time, the protocols that have this, you say like, I've heard it referred to as the sink effect. So they become more and more, what would you say, sort of unchanging, immutable in society, and then they just sort of slowly sink to the bottom of the way that the world operates, and no one ever changes them anymore. Like an example would be power sockets. We've all just decided this is what power sockets look like, and so it never really changes. And it's kind of sunk to the bottom of the base layer of how society runs itself. And kind of in the PermaWeb now, we have like Arweave ideas sort of sunk to the bottom of the layer of like how the ecosystem works.
How to do it.
And eventually, hopefully we get that to happen with Community.XYZ. People are just like, of course, this is how we run DAOs on Arweave. We just spin one up with Community.js and we vote this way or that way. It all just becomes kind of immutable and trustable because you just don't have to worry that the founder or the company is there to back it. It's just never going to stop working.
Yeah, exactly. It's available forever on the PermaWeb. So
right.
So even if the server is down or anything, you still have access to your community. You still can manage it from. You can even run Community.XYZ, the front end, on another server or something similar to that, or even go to the PermaWeb since it's available on the PermaWeb also. So,
exactly. I mean, this is something that I personally have a little bit of a fear about. Like, I think that we haven't made it easy enough for people to associate, domain names with TX IDs that change. And so one of the effects of this is people still sometimes store the front end, like on a centralized server. And it sounds okay, and no one ever really thinks about it. And then suddenly the server goes down, and it's like, now the thing is gone. The permanent application is gone, which is not great. But hopefully, we've been working on some DNS linking systems. So hopefully we can solve that in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I hope so, because that's something that I think, as you mentioned, many are lacking or are worried about. And
Yeah,
yeah, having that will be a huge improvement to what we already have, which is really amazing. So yeah, it will open many doors. That's for sure.
yeah. Amazing. Well, that was kind of like an interesting discussion around the PermaWeb and profit sharing communities. Is there anything else you want to add about either profit sharing communities, Arweave in general, or Community XYZ? Yeah, while we finish off the session.
Yeah, for sure. I will just say to the people that don't know about Community XYZ yet, just go ahead and check the website. It's community.xyz, and you can go check out, play around with the pages, with the different website pages. Sorry, you are able to access the dashboard of all the communities that have been created so far. You are able to create your own. And yeah, pretty much the same thing also for Arweave. If you don't know about Arweave yet, go check out arweave.org. And it's an amazing project, and it's really easy to get started. If you come from the traditional Web 2.0, it's as easy as that. You just need to know web technologies, and that's it. So yeah.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much, Cedrik.
Yeah, thank you for having me again, and thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye everyone.